Okay, there is nothing quite like the comforting smell of a freshly baked apple pie, and I promise you, this recipe is one of the best you're going to have. It has the most flaky, buttery crust and a tangy, spiced apple filling that honestly just tastes incredible. So to start off, we're going to prepare our apple filling. So for this recipe, you're going to need 8 large Granny Smith apples, and you want to peel, core, and thinly slice the apples so they're about just under 1/4 inch thick per slice. It's okay if they're not perfect, but you just want to make sure that you don't make them too thin, otherwise you're going to end up with a mushy apple filling. And as you're slicing your apples, transfer them to a large pot. So my apples are all sliced and in a nice large pot now, and now to these apples I'm going to add in 100 grams or 1/2 cup of soft light brown sugar and 50 grams or 1/4 cup of white granulated sugar, and then just mix that well so that the apples are coated in the sugar. So once that's mixed well, you just want to let this sit for 15 minutes, and what's going to happen is the sugar's going to help draw out some of the moisture from the apples, and this is just going to help make sure that you don't have, an overly soggy or liquidy apple pie. So about 15 minutes later, you should see some liquid at the bottom of the pan like this, and now to the pot you want to add in 1 teaspoon of lemon zest, 1 tablespoon of freshly squeezed lemon juice, 38 grams or 5 tablespoons of all-purpose flour, 1.5 teaspoons of ground cinnamon, 1/4 teaspoon of ginger powder, 1/4 teaspoon of ground nutmeg, 1/4 teaspoon of allspice, 1/4 teaspoon of salt, and 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla. And then you just want to give that a really good mix and then place the pot over a medium heat. Now once the liquid starts to gently bubble, you want to cook the mixture until the apples soften slightly and the liquid has thickened and reduced, which should take about 10 minutes. You don't want to overcook the apples, otherwise they'll start to break and you'll just end up with a really mushy apple pie. So you just want to let them kind of lose their firmness and not have a lot of liquid left at the bottom of the pan. So once you reach this kind of consistency, then the apples are ready. Now these apples need to cool completely, so what I like to do is get a tray and spread the apples out into a thin layer, and this will just help them to cool down a bit faster. This honestly just smells incredible, and now you just want to pop it aside to completely cool, and in the meantime you want to prepare your pie crust if you haven't already. Now I love using my homemade pie crust recipe, which I have on the blog. It makes 2 pie crusts, which is perfect for apple pie, and I'll be sure to link that recipe. And for that recipe you do need the dough to chill for an hour before rolling it out, so now is the perfect time to make it so that your dough and apple filling can both chill at the same time. So I've already got 2 pie crusts ready here, and I'm going to pop one into the fridge while I work with the other one because you want the dough to stay nice and firm. So once your pie crust is ready to be rolled out, you want to lightly flour your workbench and start rolling out the pie crust to about a 12-inch circle, which is perfect for a 9-inch pie dish, which is what we're using today. Now if the dough is quite firm because it's been in the fridge for longer than an hour, then you just want to let it soften a little by leaving it out at room temperature for maybe about 15 minutes or so before rolling it out. Now as I'm rolling the dough, I like to kind of clean the edges a little so I get somewhat of an even circle. So if I have little cracks around the edges, I like to just use my fingers to kind of, bring them back together. And then I also like to flour the surface a few times as I go, just to make sure that the dough doesn't stick to my workbench. So once it's around 12 inches, you want to carefully roll the dough around your rolling pin and then unroll it onto your pie dish. Now you just want to carefully mold the dough to the dish, but do this without stretching the dough. So what I like to do is just lift up the edges as I'm molding the pie dough to the dish, and this just helps to prevent it from stretching. Okay, now that is the base of our apple pie ready to go, and at this point, if your apple pie filling is completely cool, then you can move on to the next step. Otherwise, you just want to pop this into the fridge while you wait for the apples to completely cool. So once my apples are completely cool, I'm going to pour the apple mixture into the pie dish a little at a time, evenly spreading out each little batch before adding in more apples. And then once you get to the top, you want to add a bit more in the center to create a slight mound. Now at this point you want to dot little pieces of cold butter around the top. You'll need 28 grams or 2 tablespoons cut into little cubes. And this extra butter is just going to add extra depth of flavor to the apple pie. Now at this point I'm going to get my second pie crust and roll it out to about an 11-inch circle. I'm then going to cut out 1-inch wide strips, which I'll then use to create a beautiful lattice pie crust for the top of our apple pie. It looks complicated, but trust me, it's honestly pretty easy to do. So what you want to do is lay half of the strips vertically and evenly spaced on the top of the apples, leaving the longer strips for the middle and shorter strips for the edges. Now you want to fold every other strip halfway back, exposing the filling, and next you want to place a new strip of dough vertically across the pie where you folded the strips back. Now you want to unfold the horizontal strip so that they lay flat over the new vertical strip. Now fold back the opposite horizontal strips and add another vertical strip next to the first. Hopefully the visuals are helping with this because it is a little hard to explain, but you basically just want to repeat these steps now until you've created a crisscross pattern over the pie. So once the top is done, you can trim any extra long strips hanging over the edges. And if you do have a little bit of excess dough, you can go ahead and kind of add it to the edges where you feel like a bit of extra dough, could do some good. So once you're all done, you want to roll the outer edges of the dough from the outside inwards to create a thick rim around the edges of the pie dish. You also want to make sure that you roll it enough so that that thick edge is inside the pie dish as opposed to kind of hanging over the edge. This is because when you go to bake your pie, if there's not enough support for that kind of outer crust, then as it bakes, it can kind of like wilt over and fall off, which you don't want. Now at this point, I like to go ahead again and add any excess dough where I can, just to, try and reduce the dough wastage. So once I've got that nice thick crust, I then like to flute the edges, which just makes the pie look so beautiful. And to do this, all you have to do is place your index finger on the inside edge of the crust, and then use your thumb and index finger of your other hand to pinch the dough from the outside, pushing it gently around your finger on the inside. And then you just want to move along the edge of the pie crust, repeating this pinching and pushing motion until you're done. Now, how incredible is this pie looking? Just look at that. So, so beautiful. Now, to finish off preparing this pie, you want to lightly beat an egg and then use it to brush the top of the crust. You don't want to put too much, so just enough that the crust is lightly coated. And then once that's done, you want to sprinkle on 1 tablespoon of white granulated sugar or any coarse sugar that you have on hand. Okay, now that is our pie all done. So, so beautiful. And now you just want to pop this into the fridge while you place the tray into the lower third rack of your oven and preheat your oven to 220°C or 425°F. Now this little bit of extra time in the fridge is just going to help re-solidify the butter, and it's going to help achieve a beautiful flaky crust. And the tray in the oven, which is also heating up in the meantime, is going to kind of act as like a hot plate for our apple pie, which our apple pie is going to sit on, and it's going to help cook the bottom of the crust faster. And this is just going to help prevent a kind of soggy crust at the bottom of our apple pie. So once the oven is preheated and ready to go, and the edges of your pie crust feel kind of nice and firm, you want to pop your pie onto the tray in the hot oven and bake at 220°C or 425°F for 15 minutes. And then you want to turn the heat down to 180°C or 350°F and cook for another 50 minutes to an hour, or until you can see the apple pie filling kind of bubbling and the crust is a beautiful golden brown. Now, if you do feel like the top of the pie is over browning, you can cover it loosely with some aluminium foil while it continues to cook. So my apple pie is all done now. I cannot tell you how incredible this smells, and just look at how beautiful and golden that crust is. And now is the absolute hardest part, and that is waiting for at least 3 hours for this to cool before slicing and serving it. If you cut into it too early without letting the filling kind of cool and thicken, then you're going to end up with a very messy and kind of liquidy apple pie, which you you don't want. So a few hours later, the apple pie is ready to slice, and I find that using a serrated knife is the best way to do this. The first slice is always a little messy and, not easy to get perfect, but then once you've got some room in the pie dish, it's much easier to get kind of, nicer slices after that. This apple pie is honestly one of my favorite desserts of all time. The crust is so buttery, flaky, and rich, and the tart yet sweet apple filling is perfectly spiced and just goes so wonderfully with the crust. It is just so good. The crust of this apple pie is just honestly on another level. The apples just have the most wonderful flavor and they just go so well with that pie crust. Okay, I am going to save this slice to have with a cup of tea later on, because if I eat this entire slice now, I am literally just gonna have another slice. So I better just save this one. So that is it for today, guys. If you do decide to give this beautiful apple pie a go, then please do leave a review on my blog. It really helps my content out and I absolutely love hearing from you guys. I'll see you in the next video.